The town had already settled into its nightly stillness when he stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of damp pavement and distant trees, the kind of smell that only appeared after the world had slowed down enough to notice itself. There was no particular reason for him to be walking at that hour. He was not late, nor early, nor trying to reach anywhere specific. The walk itself was the point, or perhaps the absence of a point was what made it feel necessary. The street in front of him stretched forward under a line of streetlights, each one casting a soft circle of yellow light onto the pavement. Between those circles were patches of shadow that felt calm rather than dark, as though the night was not hiding anything, only resting. His footsteps echoed faintly, then softened as he adjusted his pace, letting each step fall naturally, without intention. He noticed his breathing before he noticed anything else. It had slowed on its own, lengthening with each quiet moment. Inhaling felt easy, unforced, and exhaling seemed to release more than just air. His shoulders loosened, the subtle tension he had been carrying through the day finally recognizing that it was no longer needed. The houses along the street appeared closed in upon themselves, windows dark, curtains drawn. Occasionally a porch light glowed faintly, not bright enough to illuminate much, but enough to suggest warmth behind the walls. Inside those houses, people were sleeping, or perhaps lying quietly with their thoughts drifting the way his now were. The town felt shared in that moment, connected by rest rather than activity. As he walked, he passed a narrow driveway where a car sat motionless, its surface reflecting the streetlight in soft curves. The stillness of the vehicle reminded him how everything at night seemed to take on a different role. Objects were no longer tools or destinations. They were simply shapes occupying space, content to exist without purpose. A breeze moved gently through the trees, lining the sidewalk, rustling the leaves just enough to make a sound that blended into the background. It was not loud enough to demand attention, and he was grateful for that. Some sounds were meant to be noticed, others were meant to be felt, and this one felt like part of the night's breathing. He continued forward, turning onto a smaller street that curved slightly to the left. The curve gave the impression that the road was guiding him rather than the other way around. There was something comforting in following a path without knowing where it would lead, trusting that it did not require decisions or planning. The pavement beneath his feet changed subtly as he moved, transitioning from smooth concrete to older stone tiles that bore the marks of time. The stones were uneven in places, worn down by years of footsteps, wheels, and weather. He adjusted his stride instinctively, not thinking about it, letting his body respond without instruction. A small park appeared ahead, barely noticeable except for the open space it created in the row of buildings. A short iron fence bordered the entrance, its gates standing open as though inviting anyone who passed by to wander inside. He slowed as he approached, not out of caution, but out of appreciation for the quiet it offered. The park was empty, its paths faintly visible under the dim glow of nearby lamps. Benches sat evenly spaced along the walkway, each one unoccupied, each one appearing patient. Trees stood tall and unmoving, their branches forming dark patterns against the sky. The grass, barely visible, seemed to absorb what little sound there was, making the space feel even more insulated from the rest of the town. He entered the park and followed the curved path, his steps softer now on the ground. The change in sound was subtle but noticeable, like lowering the volume on a conversation rather than ending it completely. His breathing adjusted again, slower still, matching the rhythm of his movement. As he walked deeper into the park, he became aware of how little he was thinking. Thoughts still drifted through his mind, but they no longer lingered. Each one appeared briefly, then moved on, replaced by another or by nothing at all. The absence of focus felt restful, as though his mind had been given permission to wander without direction. A bench near the center of the park caught his attention, positioned beneath a tree whose leaves barely moved in the night air. He considered sitting, imagining the feeling of resting there, looking upward at the dark canopy above. The thought was pleasant, but he continued walking, content with the motion. The path led him toward a small footbridge at the edge of the park. It crossed a narrow stream that was almost invisible in the darkness, its presence suggested only by a faint reflection of light and the quiet sense of movement beneath the surface. The bridge was made of wood, its planks worn smooth by countless crossings. He stepped onto the bridge, feeling the subtle change in texture beneath his feet. Halfway across, he slowed and paused, resting his hands lightly on the railing. He looked down, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness, watching the soft shimmer where the water caught the light. The stream moved steadily, unconcerned with observation, and he found comfort in its consistency. After a moment, he resumed walking, stepping off the bridge and following the path as it led him back toward another quiet street. The transition felt seamless, as though the park had been a gentle interruption rather than a detour. The street beyond the park was narrower, lined with smaller houses and taller trees. The lights here were fewer, spaced farther apart, creating longer stretches of shadow. Despite that, the street felt safe, held together by the familiarity of its shapes and the softness of the night. He continued forward, his pace unchanging, his body relaxed. The world around him seemed to have accepted his presence without question, and that acceptance allowed him to let go even more. There was no sense of being watched, no expectation placed upon him. He was simply another quiet element within the scene. As he walked, he noticed how time felt different. Minutes no longer passed in a measurable way. Instead, moments blended together, forming a continuous stretch of calm. The usual markers of time appointments, deadlines, obligations felt distant, almost irrelevant. The road sloped gently downward, leading him toward a wider street near the river. He felt the subtle shift in elevation, the way gravity assisted his steps. His breathing remained steady, his muscles loose. Each movement felt efficient, requiring little effort. The sound of water reached him before the river itself came into view. It was faint, barely more than a suggestion, but it carried with it a sense of openness. When he reached the river path, he turned instinctively, following the walkway that ran parallel to the slow-moving water. The river reflected the lights from the opposite bank, stretching them into long, wavering lines across its surface. He watched them as he walked, letting his gaze soften, not focusing on any one point for too long. The movement of the reflections mirrored his own steady pace, reinforcing the sense of continuity. The path was wide and smooth, bordered by a low railing that separated it from the water. He rested his hand on the railing briefly as he passed, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. The sensation grounded him, connecting him physically to the space. He walked on, allowing the river to guide his thoughts, or perhaps to quiet them altogether. The steady movement of the water seemed to absorb any lingering tension, carrying it away downstream without effort. Further ahead, a bridge arched over the river, its lights forming a gentle curve against the night sky. He moved toward it, drawn not by curiosity but by the simple flow of the path. Crossing the bridge felt like a continuation rather than a change, another step in the same calm sequence. As he reached the bridge, he noticed how his body felt heavier, not with fatigue, but with relaxation. His eyelids felt slightly weighted, his movements slower, though still smooth. The night seemed to encourage this gradual settling, offering no resistance. He stepped onto the bridge and walked along its length, the sound of his footsteps echoing softly beneath him. He did not stop this time, instead allowing the crossing to happen without pause. The opposite side welcomed him with another quiet street, similar yet subtly different from the ones he had already passed through. The town felt vast and small at the same time, each street a variation on the same peaceful theme. He realized that he could keep walking indefinitely, always finding another calm path, another quiet corner, another gentle moment. And that thought, rather than energizing him, made him feel even more at ease. After crossing the bridge, he found himself walking through a part of town that felt older, quieter, in a different way. The buildings here were lower, their walls marked by time, and the streets narrower, as though they had been designed for walking rather than for speed. The streetlights cast softer shadows, and the night air felt cooler, carrying the faint scent of stone and water. His steps echoed gently for a moment before fading, absorbed by the stillness around him. He noticed how naturally his pace had settled into something slow and steady, without effort. There was no need to think about how fast or slow he should move. His body seemed to understand the rhythm of the night on its own. The street curved slightly, guiding him past a row of closed shops. Their windows reflected the glow of the streetlights, creating layered images that blurred together. He passed a small cafe, its chairs neatly stacked inside, tables wiped clean, everything prepared for the morning, but resting now. The scene carried a quiet sense of completion, as if the day had been carefully put away. Further along, he noticed a bookstore with tall windows and shelves visible inside. Even though it was closed, the sight of books resting quietly behind the glass felt comforting. He imagined the calm inside, the soft smell of paper, the stillness that filled the space when no one was there. The thought slowed his mind even further. He continued walking, letting his gaze move easily from one detail to another. A doorway with worn steps, a lantern hanging beside a closed gate, a narrow alley leading into darkness, not mysterious, just unused at that hour. Everything felt settled, content to exist without attention. The street led him toward a small square where several paths met. At its center stood a simple fountain, turned off for the night. The basin held a shallow pool of water that reflected the nearby lights in gentle patterns. He slowed as he approached, drawn by the openness of the space. He walked around the fountain, his footsteps tracing a wide circle. The air here felt slightly cooler, more open, and he took a deeper breath without realizing it. The sound of the town was distant now, reduced to a faint hum that blended seamlessly into the night. He paused near one of the benches lining the square, considering sitting for a moment. The idea felt pleasant, but he remained standing, content to simply be there. After a short while, he resumed walking, choosing one of the quiet streets that led away from the square. This street felt even calmer than the last. Its surface smoother, its lights fewer. Trees lined the sidewalk, their branches stretching overhead and forming a loose canopy. The leaves barely moved, and the shadows they cast were soft and irregular, creating patterns that shifted subtly as he passed beneath them. As he walked, he noticed the way his thoughts continued to drift without anchoring themselves. There was no urgency, no need to follow any particular idea to its conclusion. If something arose in his mind, he allowed it to pass, trusting that nothing important needed his attention at that moment. The street gently sloped upward, leading him toward a quieter residential area. Houses here were spaced farther apart, each with a small yard or garden. The gardens were dark, but he could sense their presence, the outlines of bushes and fences blending into the night. He passed a gate left slightly ajar, and for a moment he imagined the sound it might make during the day. Now it was silent, resting in its open position. The stillness felt deliberate, as though the night had asked everything to pause together. His breathing remained slow and even, his body loose and comfortable. He noticed a pleasant heaviness in his limbs, not tiring, but grounding. Each step felt supported, the pavement beneath his feet steady and familiar. At the end of the street, he reached another small intersection. This one lacked traffic lights, relying instead on simple signs that stood quietly at the corners. He crossed without stopping, the road empty in both directions. On the other side, the street narrowed again, leading him toward a path that ran alongside a line of trees, separating the neighborhood from a wider open space. The path was paved, smooth, and well kept. Though unused at this hour, he turned onto the path and continued walking. The trees to his side formed a dark wall of leaves and branches, while the other side opened onto a gently sloping field. The field stretched out into the darkness, its surface barely visible, but its presence unmistakable. The openness of the space brought a different kind of calm. Without buildings nearby, the night felt larger, the sky more expansive. He looked up briefly, noticing how the stars appeared faintly between patches of cloud, their light softened by distance. He walked along the path, letting his eyes return to the ground ahead. The repetition of his steps, the steady movement forward, created a sense of continuity that felt reassuring. There was nothing to interrupt him, nothing to demand a change in pace. As he moved, he became aware of how little effort he was using. His body felt efficient, relaxed, as though it had found an optimal way to move without strain. This ease spread through him, settling into his shoulders, his back, his neck. The path curved gently, following the natural shape of the land. He followed without question, trusting the direction it offered. The night did not feel empty or isolating. Instead, it felt like a shared space, quiet but supportive. He passed a small wooden sign at the edge of the path, its writing unreadable in the low light. He did not try to read it. The sign's presence alone was enough another detail existing without explanation. Further along, the path led him toward a narrow bridge crossing a shallow drainage canal. The canal held a thin ribbon of water that moved slowly, reflecting the faint glow of a nearby lamp. He crossed the bridge without stopping, the wood beneath his feet solid and reassuring. On the other side, the path widened slightly, and he found himself approaching a cluster of buildings set back from the road. These were older structures, possibly warehouses or storage spaces, now quiet and unused at night. Their walls rose up in simple lines, unadorned and calm. He walked past them, noticing how their size did not feel imposing in the darkness. Instead, they blended into the environment, their edges softened by shadow. The absence of activity made them feel almost peaceful. The path eventually rejoined a road that led him back toward the river. The sound of water grew gradually, more noticeable, though still faint. He turned onto the river path once again, feeling a sense of familiarity as he did so. The river moved at the same steady pace as before, its surface reflecting the lights from the opposite bank. He found comfort in the consistency, the way nothing had changed since he last walked here. The night had not shifted or altered itself. It continued as it was. He followed the river path, his steps matching the rhythm of the water. His breathing remained slow, his thoughts quiet. The world felt simplified, reduced to a few essential sensations: movement, air, light. As he walked, he noticed a small set of stairs leading down toward the water. He did not descend them, but he acknowledged their presence, imagining the view from below, closer to the surface of the river. The thought passed gently, without drawing him in. He continued along the path, passing another bench, then another. Each one stood empty, waiting without expectation. The idea of waiting felt gentle rather than tense. Everything seemed to have all the time it needed. The path led him beneath another bridge, this one larger, its structure casting broad shadows across the walkway. The sound of the river echoed slightly here, creating a deeper tone that resonated softly. He walked through the shadowed space, unbothered by the change, and emerged back into the light on the other side. Beyond the bridge, the river path widened, offering a clearer view of the water. He slowed slightly, letting his steps stretch out, his movement becoming even more relaxed. His body felt warm now, comfortable within the cool night air. He noticed how his eyelids felt heavier, how his gaze softened naturally. There was no effort required to maintain focus. He allowed his eyes to drift, resting on the reflections in the water, the distant lights, the gentle movement of the surface. The path curved again, leading him away from the river and back toward the town. He followed it, trusting the gradual transition. The buildings ahead were spaced out, their lights dimmer, their presence quieter. He walked into another residential area, this one composed of low houses and narrow lanes. The streets here were almost completely dark, lit only by the occasional lamp. Despite this, he felt at ease, guided by familiarity and the steady rhythm of his steps. He passed a mailbox, then a short fence, then a small tree growing close to the sidewalk. Each detail registered briefly, then faded, replaced by the next. The sequence felt soothing, predictable, free of surprise. As he continued, he became aware of how deeply relaxed he felt. His breathing was slow and full, his muscles loose. There was a sense of sinking inward, as though his body were gradually preparing for rest. The street led him toward a gentle bend, and he followed it without thinking. Beyond the bend, the lights grew fewer still, the night deepening around him. The town felt further away now, its activity reduced to memory. He walked on, content with the simplicity of movement. There was no need to check the time, no need to assess how far he had gone. The walk existed outside of measurement. Eventually, the street brought him to a quiet corner where two narrow lanes met. He paused there, standing still for a moment. The air felt cool against his skin, the silence deep and unbroken. He took a slow breath, then another. The pause felt natural, unforced. After a short while, he resumed walking, choosing one of the lanes and continuing forward. The lane was short, leading him toward a familiar part of town. As he walked, he recognized the shapes of buildings he had passed earlier, now appearing slightly different under the changing night light. He felt a subtle sense of completion, not because the walk was ending, but because it had become whole in itself. The journey did not need a conclusion. It had already given him what it offered. He continued walking, letting the night carry him forward, his thoughts quiet, his body relaxed, his breath steady. The lane eventually opened into a broader street, one that felt familiar even if he could not immediately remember when he had last walked there. The surface of the road was smooth, the sidewalk wide, and the spacing of the streetlights even and reassuring. Their glow created a gentle rhythm as he moved forward, passing from one pool of light into the next. His steps remained slow and steady, guided more by feeling than intention. There was no sense of anticipation, no expectation of what lay ahead. The walk had become its own quiet loop, something that existed entirely in the present moment. He noticed how his breathing continued without effort, each inhale and exhale flowing naturally into the next. The sensation of air moving through his chest felt calming, grounding him gently in his body. Any remaining tension seemed distant now, as though it belonged to another time. The houses along this street were modest and closely set, their facades softened by darkness. Some had small lights glowing inside, muted and warm. Others were completely dark, their windows reflecting the streetlights rather than revealing anything beyond. Together, they formed a quiet pattern, repeating and consistent. He passed a low wall covered in ivy, the leaves dark and still. The wall extended for several meters, before ending at a corner where the street turned gently. He followed the turn without hesitation, letting the curve guide him. The night air felt cooler here, and he adjusted his breathing slightly, inhaling a bit deeper. The change was subtle, but noticeable, like stepping into a different room. He welcomed it, allowing the sensation to move through him without resistance. Further along, the street sloped downward again, leading him toward a quieter section of town where the lights were fewer and the shadows longer. Despite the darkness, the space felt open and calm. There was no sense of isolation, only the quiet assurance that the night continued around him. He walked on, his pace unchanged, his body relaxed. The repetition of movement had become almost meditative. Each step mirrored the last, creating a steady sequence that required no thought. At the bottom of the slope, he reached another intersection, this one marked by a small island of plants in the center. Low shrubs filled the space, their shapes blending into a single dark mass. A single lamp illuminated the area softly, casting gentle shadows. He circled the island slowly, then continued along the street that led away from it. The act felt unremarkable, yet comforting. Another simple choice made without deliberation. The street narrowed again, becoming a quiet residential lane. The sound of his footsteps was barely audible now, softened by the night. He noticed how his senses seemed attuned to small details, the texture of the pavement, the way light faded at the edges of his vision, the feeling of his clothing moving lightly as he walked. His thoughts were sparse, appearing only briefly before dissolving. There was no effort involved in letting them go. They simply passed, like distant lights seen from a moving train. As he continued, he became aware of a subtle feeling of heaviness in his eyelids. Not an urge to sleep exactly, but a gentle reminder that rest was near, available whenever he chose it. The sensation was pleasant, reassuring rather than demanding. The lane led him past a small cluster of trees planted close together. Their branches formed overlapping silhouettes against the night sky, creating a pattern that shifted slightly as he moved. He glanced upward for a moment, then let his gaze return to the path ahead. Beyond the trees, the lane opened into a wider street once more, this one leading toward the outskirts of town. The buildings here were fewer, set farther apart, and the spaces between them felt expansive. He followed the sidewalk as it curved gently, his steps maintaining their quiet rhythm. The absence of noise felt complete now, as though the town itself had fully settled into rest. He passed a small playground, empty and still. The shapes of swings and slides were barely visible in the low light, but their presence evoked a sense of calm rather than activity. Everything there was waiting, content to remain unused for the night. The sidewalk continued past the playground and toward a stretch of open land bordered by a simple fence. Beyond the fence, the land sloped gently downward, disappearing into darkness. He did not approach the fence, but he sensed the openness it marked, the way it signaled a boundary without enclosing anything. He walked alongside the fence for a short while, then turned away as the sidewalk curved back toward town. The movement felt natural, unforced, as though the walk itself were guiding him gently back rather than onward. As he moved, he noticed how deeply relaxed his body felt now. His shoulders were loose, his arms heavy at his sides. His steps felt automatic, requiring no conscious control. The streetlights ahead appeared softer, their glow less intense. The night seemed to be deepening gradually, without any clear transition. He welcomed the change, allowing it to settle over him. He passed another quiet intersection, then another, each one similar to the last. The repetition felt soothing, reinforcing the sense that nothing unexpected would occur. Everything was predictable, steady, safe. At one corner, he paused again, not because he needed to, but because the stillness invited him to. He stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the night air against his skin. He listened not for any specific sound, but for the absence of urgency. The silence was not empty. It was full of calm. After a short while, he resumed walking, continuing down a familiar street. He recognized it now as one he had passed earlier in the evening, though it felt different under the deeper night. The houses looked softer, their edges less defined. The streetlights cast longer shadows, stretching them across the pavement. He stepped through them without noticing where one ended and another began. His breathing remained steady, his thoughts minimal. There was no need to recall where he had been or where he was going. The walk existed entirely within itself. As he approached the end of the street, he saw the gentle rise of a small hill ahead. He began climbing it slowly, his steps remaining even. The incline required slightly more effort, but his body responded without strain. Reaching the top of the hill, he found another quiet overlook, smaller than the one before. From here, he could see a scattering of lights below, marking the layout of the town. The sight was calming, the orderly arrangement of streets and buildings offering a sense of quiet structure. He stood there for a moment, looking out, breathing slowly. The cool air felt refreshing, and he welcomed it. There was no desire to linger too long. The moment was complete as it was. He turned and began walking down the hill, his steps lighter as gravity assisted him. The descent felt smooth, effortless, reinforcing the sense of relaxation that had settled into him. At the base of the hill, the street led him back toward the center of town. The path was familiar now, the shapes recognizable, the rhythm well established. He continued walking, feeling the gentle pull of rest growing stronger. His eyelids felt heavier, his movements slower, though still fluid. The night seemed to encourage this gradual winding down, offering no resistance. He passed the same park he had walked through earlier, now even quieter. The path inside was barely visible, but he sensed its presence. He did not enter this time, instead continuing along the sidewalk that bordered it. The street carried him past the park and toward a cluster of buildings near where he had begun. The sense of returning felt natural, not final, simply another phase of the walk. As he moved, he allowed his attention to drift inward, noticing the feeling of calm that filled him. There was no tension left to release. Everything felt settled. The streetlights ahead marked the final stretch of the walk. He followed them slowly, his pace unchanging. Each step felt like a continuation rather than an ending. When he reached the familiar corner near where he had started, he slowed and stopped. The street was quiet, unchanged, waiting. He stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the night surround him. The walk had not required effort or purpose. It had simply been. He did not feel the need to move further. The sense of motion could continue without his body now, carried gently by memory and imagination. As he remained still, the world around him seemed to soften even more. The lights blurred slightly, the edges of things fading. His breathing remained slow and steady. He allowed himself to imagine the walk continuing, step after step, without him needing to follow it consciously. The streets, the lights, the quiet shapes, all of it could carry on without his attention. His body felt heavy now, comfortably so. The night felt close, protective, calm. There was nothing more to do, nothing more to notice, nothing more to consider. The walk had given him everything it needed to. He remained there, breathing slowly, letting the stillness deepen. And as the town slept around him, he allowed himself to rest as well, the quiet journey continuing softly in his mind, even as his awareness began to fade.